Hello everyone, this is Ella. Today we're going on a trip to Walmart on the search for some hopefully decent watercolor supplies. I had to cross the river to find a Walmart because there are no Walmarts in New York City. If you are from outside the United States and you're wondering what a Walmart looks like, this is what it looks like. They actually have a pretty great stationery section and art supply section. I actually got distracted in the stationery section by some mid-liner brush pens, but then I found the actual art supply section. They have a pretty good selection of things, mostly student grade art supplies. They have some interesting brush assortment, some palettes. They have student grade paints like Daler Rowney and Royal and Langnickel. And they also have some student grade watercolor papers like Hanson XL, which is paper that a lot of you are probably familiar with. They also had some Grumbacher watercolor paper that I'd never seen before, consider a spiral bound type of pad. So I decided to buy these three things. I'm gonna take them home, we're gonna review them and see if they're any good. So I'm back home now with the materials that I purchased. And actually, to be fully transparent, I bought these materials a few months ago. So it's been a few months since I purchased them. I've actually been using the paper and the paints for about a month and a half. I actually wanted this review to be a more robust review and not just a first impressions review. And I wanted to give you good insights as to whether these materials are really good and you can use them to make decent art. All right, let's talk about price. How much did I pay for these three materials? I paid $6.86 US for the watercolor pad. I paid $9.97 for the paint set and brush. And I paid $2.64 for the Sharpie. And that comes to a total of $19.47. So I spent less than $20 before taxes on all these materials. Technically, this would be all you need to start in watercolor. You have your paper, you have brush, paint, and you even have an extra opaque white for highlights. First, I want to start with the paper. So this is a Grumbacher watercolor paper. It's 140 pounds, 9 inches by 12 inches. This is a great size to start with. If you're starting out in watercolor, you want 140-pound watercolor paper so it's thick enough so it doesn't buckle. So this is a great weight. One thing I thought was really interesting about this particular spiral paper pad is that you have the flexibility to remove the pages, work with the pages outside the book and then put them back in the book, so you can actually rearrange your sketches and what you have inside your sketchbook, which is something that most other sketchbooks don't offer the flexibility. I thought that was really cool. And the fact that I hadn't tried Grumbacher watercolor paper before and this additional little feature thought would be a great way, a great opportunity to try this out. So what I did was I tried out this paper with various different watercolor soluble media, or water soluble media, I should say. And so I'll show you some sketches, rough sketches that I did with each of those media types. And then I also, of course, use these paints here. And that will be part of my review for the paints. So first, I did a sketch with watercolor crayons. These are Faber-Castell. These are children's watercolor crayons. They're not professional grade. They are basically children's crayons that you can add water to them. They're really cheap. They work pretty well on the paper. The only problem is that it peeled. So I actually got little pieces of the surface of the paper peeling because I had to scrub quite a bit to get the pigment to move around. So definitely this paper is not super sturdy in terms of like the surface. So you don't want to be scrubbing it a lot. So if you're using it for watercolor, you don't want to, it doesn't take a lot of abuse. So just know that. I also used it with some of my favorite watercolor paints, which are the Pretty Excellent watercolor paints. You've seen me use these in other videos. So I wanted to try those because I know those work really well for me in other types of paper. I used it in this paper. It worked okay. You have some streaking and some blooming, quite a bit of blooming that happens. With cellulose paper, because it's student grade, it doesn't really absorb water very evenly. So you will get streaks and blooms, which is expected. Some are better than others. I would say with the Canson XL, I do get less of these blooms and streaks than with the Grumbacher paper. So that's based on my experience. Now what I did was I wanted to compare this with 100% cotton paper. So the painting that I have here on my left is actually made, it's the same paint, like, well, similar painting. I made it with the same exact paint, so same colors, same pretty excellent watercolors. This is 100% Cotton Arches watercolor paper, which I know it's like one of the best watercolor papers in the world. A lot of people like it, so I wanted to compare it to that. You can tell that here on the Arches 100% cotton paper, the colors are a lot more vibrant. They mixed better. There was a better transition between the colors. There's less blooming and no streaking. So you can see that there's a big difference. Now, if you're a beginner and you're just starting out in watercolor, maybe you don't need Arches 100% cotton paper yet. So you can do some of the basic techniques on cellulose paper like this, but you're just not gonna be able to do all the techniques, and your paintings might not look exactly the same as those paintings you see people painting on YouTube or Instagram, because they might be using cotton paper. So one thing I noticed is that layering with this paints are not great, and I'll show you another example of layering. If you're wondering what this neon little highlights are, that's actually neon crayons that I used as a resist technique for this painting. I'm thinking of actually doing another video about that technique in particular. So if you're interested, let me know in the comments below. And then I started using the Royal and Langnickel paints. So now I want to review these and just show you how these are. So this is actually a fan palette that I've seen a lot online on YouTube and in other reviews. You know, lots of fan palettes. They became very trendy, kind of a novelty in the past year and a half to 2 years. I've been curious about fan palettes, but I never bought one. I thought this was such a good deal at $10, including the water brush and 18 colors of paint, that I just couldn't pass it up, and it would be a good opportunity to try it out. So in the back, it has a little description: highly pigmented, vibrant colors, paint trays pivot out for easy access, portable, easy to use, use detachable sponge to remove excess pigment or water, watercolors dry quickly in the pan for quick cleanup, transparent, blend easily, includes 18 colors, mixing tray, water brush, and a sponge. So let me pull these out. So on paper, they sound great, right? Unfortunately, they don't have any pigment information. They don't have color names, or it does not say whether this is non-toxic or safe for children. So I wouldn't recommend this for kids because it is unclear what type of pigments they're using. They are definitely not artist grade. They are student grade watercolors. But that being said, they are very pigmented and very transparent, and they do mix easily. So I did create a little chart with all the colors. You have one kind of warm yellow. You have 3 oranges, 2 reds, 1 warm and 1 cool. You have 2 purples, 3 greens, 3 blues, 1 yellow ochre, 1 burnt sienna, and 1 black. There's a white here that's very transparent and doesn't really do much for me. So I don't have much use for transparent white in watercolor. If you wanna make a color lighter, you just add more water. If you want actually opaque highlights, you would use gouache or something that's more opaque. So this is kind of useless for me, but it's included in the palette set. As you can see, they're very vibrant. The color selection is not terrible. That being said, I think there are too many oranges and not enough yellows. At least one lemon yellow would have been nice. And the fact that it doesn't have light fastness information or pigment information, it's kind of a bummer, but it does have a good array of blues, greens. I can live with a warm and a cool red. And the black, I might use it every now and then. It's not a color that I use too much in watercolor. I did do a bit of in the back. This is 100% cotton B paper. They do mix quite well. They are pretty transparent. They do lift a little bit, so they're not super permanent in that sense. So if you want to do layers, might not be the best, especially in this paper, because this paper is not great for layering either. So the combination of these paints and this paper is not ideal, but I'll go into more detail in a bit. It does bring a water brush that is it has a short barrel, and you can put water inside and squeeze it, and water will come out just like that. So that's pretty cool. It actually works really well. It works very similar to every other water brush that I own, so definitely that's great. And I love water brushes. They're great on the go. I haven't used a sponge, but it's nice to have it there. There's also a palette that's in the bottom here, so you can mix paints. It's actually pretty good in terms of it showing up the colors and not staining. So this is one of the few plastic mixing palettes that I've ever used that doesn't stain. I used almost all the colors in this area, and you can see it's perfectly white, so that's great. That being said, now let's go to the bad, because there's some I think non-negotiables here that I was very disappointed. I had high hopes for this palette, especially once I swatched them and I used them. There are a few negatives to this palette. The most obvious negative is the fact that all the paints cracked after the first use. So if you notice, I'm gonna get this closer to the camera. All the paints are completely cracked, and it's pretty terrible. So some of them are flaking off. There's little pieces of paint basically, like, you know, flaking off here. This would not happen with good quality paints. Good quality paints have binders and humectants that will keep the paint solid but not cracked, and it wouldn't be overly dry. So there's pieces of, if you look at that orange right there, the actual pan is cracking, and the red as well. So I would expect this, it's kind of loose actually, so I would expect that to fall off any minute, which is a shame. And especially if you're traveling with this, you'll have pieces of paint everywhere, and also transferring to other colors, so you could contaminate other colors. When I try to pick it up with a brush now, flakes of solid paint will come off, and then it will stick to the paper, and it will make it really hard to get an even wash. So this is extremely disappointing. I didn't expect that. I found that these paints were a lot better in terms of performance on the paper the first time I wet the pans compared to other student grade paints that I've seen at Walmart. That being said, the actual palette itself is also the fan palette. It's not my favorite. There are paints back here, so there's like a kind of a blue and a purple here that they're hard to get to. So even if you try to open these, you know, it's hard to get my brush down there. You will have to kind of leave. You see, I have a piece of paint coming off. Oh my god. You would have to move these around constantly if you want to use like one of the paints that is up here. It's and if it's wet, it will wet the bottom, and you know, it's not convenient. So I don't like the fan palette setup. And on top of that, the paints are obviously just not great in terms of like the binders they used and the ingredients they used to make them, so they wouldn't last you a very long time. So instead of being a good deal, which it's what I thought it was, for $10 you get brush and 18 colors to get started, you actually get a set that you're unable to really use that much. I did paint a few things with this palette. I painted these pots. You can see some like white pieces here on the area that I wanted to make darker. That's actually paint lifting from the first layers. You can see it here too on the edge. It was hard to transition. I think that speaks more to the paper than the paint. Knowing that, after painting this, I decided, you know what, then this paper is probably better for the types of watercolor painting techniques that don't require a lot of layering, that are more loose and maybe abstract, and that are mostly like done in one layer. So then I made this sketch, some roses, and I use a resist technique with crayons again, but these are not neon crayons, they're just regular. I use like a Crayola gold crayon, and that worked a lot better. I'm happier with that result. The paint moved around and created nice effects. So now, knowing that the paper is okay, has some limitations, but it's usable for certain techniques, and the paints are a no-go. Let's look at the Sharpie, oil-based white opaque like ink. I actually used it to just scribble on this like darker section of the pots. So pretty opaque, which is great. I'm always looking for nice opaque white pigments. I use this black paper to sometimes compare different types of white ink or other opaque inks. So this is the Liquitex acrylic ink in white, and it's an ink that a lot of people like to use. I actually found it not to be that opaque. I actually think it looks more opaque on the screen than it does on my paper when I look at it live. But then this is the Sharpie oil-based paint marker in white. Is quite opaque. I think it's a lot more opaque than the Liquitex. It actually has a nicer finish to it. I like it. It's a bit of a matte finish, but it's a nice matte finish. And I think I'm going to be using this a lot. I can use it for highlighting watercolor paintings. I can use it for maybe some calligraphy or doing sketching on dark paper, just like that. So I definitely will recommend the Sharpie oil-based paint marker. So in conclusion, to answer my original question of whether you can find decent watercolor supplies at Walmart, I would say not really. Honestly, the paper it's okay. The paints are a no-go. The only thing I would recommend is the Sharpie oil-based paint marker, which is definitely great. But honestly, if you want to try out watercolor and you don't want to be frustrated, please go to an actual art supply store and buy other products that are higher quality, so that you can actually learn to love the medium and get the most out of it. So that is my review for you. Unfortunately, not all reviews are going to be positive. I hate to not be able to show you, things that are great materials, but I think it's necessary also to do reviews of materials that you had high expectations for, and then you are disappointed, so that if you buy what you're getting yourself into, and you can decide where to spend your money. So I hope this review was helpful. Well, that's all I have for you today. Thanks for watching. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing for more. See you in my next video. Take care. Bye-bye.